Hey friends, welcome back to Fishing for Men. We are continuing a series really, all about how to live a healthy life. And if you've been following along, you know we've talked a little bit about physical health, we've talked about mental health, and today we're going to dive into really the third aspect of that, which is spiritual health. So here to help me do that, this is Spencer, by the way. I've got some good friends here to my left.
Cole's here. Hey, this is Brandon.
Hey, it's Cody.
Hey guys, Billy's here.
Awesome. So I want to go back to the recent episode where we talked about physical health, and we talked about all the things you need to do to be healthy. Because what I noticed after that episode was when I would log into my socials in a little amount of time, my algorithm was always popping up certain things to me that I've Googled, like keto diet or kettlebells. So I'm curious, if you all were to look at your algorithms related to your physical health, what would be showing up these days?
Physical health?
Yeah.
Oh, lots of food and exercise for me, for sure.
Carnivore diet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All the steak.
Usually it will be in 2 months. It'll be running shoes because those are going out of commission. So it'll be running shoes, and then on top of that, I'm going to use good old Copilot to help me draft a half marathon plan.
Yeah. I think that's why mine's kettlebells, because I did a chat GPT for a kettlebell circuit. So
I can help you out with those.
I'm sure.
I got you.
But I bring all that up to say, those are the things that sometimes we put a lot of effort into Googling, and researching what I can do, because we can see that, right? So it's pretty easy to have an idea of what it looks like to be physically healthy, because there's tangible realities of what that looks like every time we walk past a mirror, right?
Mm-hmm.
So listeners, I don't know what your algorithm might look like, but one of the things that we talk about, it's easy to see what steps we have to take to get to physical health. Spiritual health isn't as easy, and sometimes it can actually be pretty convoluted, I feel like. So I can't really see my spirit. I wish there was some sort of spiritual mirror that you could actually see it. And I guess the question is, do I even know what it looks like when I'm spiritually healthy or unhealthy? And so for us, we really want to base some of this episode off of thinking about our spiritual health in terms of what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 45, which says, "A good man brings good things out of the goods stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of."
There's a lot of heart mentioned in there.
There is a lot of good, evil, evil. So some key things that we really want to think about as we approach this with this episode is, what is spiritual health? Listener, if you had to ask what does it look like to be spiritual healthy, what would you say? Why is it important? Where is my spiritual health at right now? What does a scale for spiritual health look like? And would we like the number we saw on it? And if not, how do I get healthier? So we're going to cover the what, the why, the where, and the how. So thinking about these questions is going to help us see just how far and wide spiritual health really reaches into our lives. I think it's going to help us guide toward a deeper, more meaningful relationship with Christ, as well as those around us. So there's a lot around here. I know that this is a topic where really Brandon and Billy, you guys have a lot of passion here. Do y'all want to get us kicked off in some form or fashion?
Sure, I'd love to. So you just read out of Luke chapter 6, and I think one of the key words that it was focused on in there was the word heart. That's what it kept on talking about. It talked about a good heart. It talked about a bad heart. So I think we want to frame spiritual health revolving kind of around our heart and where it's at. And I want to just throw out one more scripture to kind of base our conversation around out of Ezekiel. So Ezekiel was a prophet from the Old Testament. He is prophesying to the Israelites about the situation where they were in, and that if they didn't change things, that they were going to get taken off into exile. So not a good situation. In the context of that, Ezekiel says to the Israelites, speaking to them this word as being a word from God. He says, "I," meaning God, "will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Then you will live in the land I gave your ancestors. You will be my people, and I will be your God. So I think, if you think about those words and then what Spencer just shared with us, that's kind of like the New Testament, Old Testament version. But the common thing we see in both of these is it talks about a change in the heart. Do you have a good heart or do you have a bad heart? And hopefully that change is going from bad to good, obviously. But so I want to get us started there, kind of looking at what that means, the condition of our heart.
Yeah, like 2 episodes ago, we talked about heart posture a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that really comes to mind for me is heart posture. And since recording that episode, that comes to mind constantly now. Where is my heart posture? So, like you said before we started recording, yeah, something came to mind for me. The spiritual health is heart posture.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So
I'm thinking about the Israelites who are receiving this message.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I'm going to give you a new heart. And I'm going, what in the world are you talking about?
What does that mean? Right?
I'm going to put a new spirit in you. And I'm like, who are you and what are you talking about? I'm putting myself in their shoes and trying to listen to this. I picture all of them just kind of look at him with these blank stares of like, who is this guy? And what in the world are you talking about?
Well, and I think that's a good point because this is at a point in their history when they had kind of wandered far from God. It wasn't like they were being obedient and, going to the synagogue every week and being devout. This is when they had wandered away. They were worshiping other idols. So either like, who are you? Or like, can't he just leave us alone and let us do our thing?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's like maybe this was the first time they were actually asking, like hearing that you have bad spiritual health. So it might raise this question for us to consider too: is what is spiritual health? Like if we had to define it, because Ezekiel's telling them you have bad spiritual health.
Yeah. The question that comes to mind for me is, how do I know I'm in a bad spot? Like, how do I know my spiritual health is not good?
So those are all very good questions. I think to get us headed in the right direction at how we look at that, starting at the end almost, I want to say it really comes down to what is our relationship like with God and how is that flowing out of us into our relationships with other people. Tying it back to that verse in Luke 6 where it talks about out of the goodness of a good heart. Or I also think of the verse where Jesus talks about how like a good tree can't produce bad fruit and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. Same thing there. Like that's kind of like the posture, the outflow of that person, their attitude, how they treat other people. That's going to be kind of the first way that you can kind of look at what's going on there. How is my spiritual health? How is the spiritual health of the people around me? Not in a judgmental way, but for example, the guys in this room, to help check each other and see where we're each at.
So how do you define this? Like if somebody, whoever's listening, says, what is it? How do you define it?
Maybe I'm thinking too basic, but again, I go back to we've seen heart how many times in here. And in Ezekiel, he says, give you a new heart. So to me, it's where is your heart at? Is it, like you said, producing good fruit?
Mm-hmm.
If it's producing good fruit, I think you're in a good spiritual health. If it's producing bad fruit, then I think you need a new heart and have good heart posture to produce that good fruit.
Yeah, so playing off that word fruit, where is something that we could maybe tie the word fruit in with how we could measure our spiritual health? Any other Bible verses you grew up hearing, learning that talks about fruit? Nothing.
You have one, I know.
I do.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm going somewhere.
Please go there with
Genesis.
it.
I was going to, no, let's not get on a Genesis tangent tonight. That does take my mind other places. But no, I was thinking of the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. So one of the things in there I think that's key to that, and is at the very beginning is love. And to take it back to Genesis, like God.
You said we weren't going back to Genesis.
Well, you dropped that in there, and it took my mind in a different direction. So, love. Like if we think about who God is, two things I think about God. God is love, and he exists in community. Like even before he created the world, he existed in community with the Trinity. And then out of that, he created this world and put us in it specifically to be in relationship with us. And there was to be that love relationship. And as humanity spread over the earth, it was his design for us to exist in relationships of love too. Now, obviously, that's after the fall, that's gotten out of whack, and there's a lot of hurt and pain in this world, but that's his original design. So when I think about spiritual health, I think about it maybe put it in a really simple way as kind of like a love meter, not like romantic love, like, our mind might first go to, but in that, if you spent time in the New Testament, you'll hear about the word love in the Greek language. Like there's multiple different words that all get translated into love, like that agape love, like that brotherly love that you have for others. So I think when we look at spiritual health and the condition of our heart, the posture of our heart, we ourselves know that we're broken inside, and we can only give what we receive from God. So I think it all starts with our relationship with God and whether we have received that love from him. Yeah. And so obviously the starting point for that is, have you accepted Jesus? Do you have him in your life? Mm-hmm. And that is not to say that there aren't great people out there who aren't Christians that don't have love. But as we'll get to, I think, later in the conversation, there's certain things in our life that we can't change about ourselves that only God can. So I think it's a key point that it all starts with God and having received his love first.
But even after I do that, I'm going to go back to the question of how do I know my spiritual health is in a good spot? Like I'm still, if I'm a listener right now, I'm still like, I don't know what this is.
And I was about to say, listeners, this is proof that you're not dealing with some biblical scholars, because we're literally figuring this out as we talk about it.
Well, that's the point of the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? To talk through it.
So this one was always helpful for me, and this is Dallas Willard's definition of the soul, but I think it applies here, which is the soul encompasses your social aspects of your life, so like relationships, what you do for fun, things you go out and do, your body, which we've talked about, your mind, and your heart. And so I think when you think about your spiritual health, it's when all of these are in alignment with God.
Yeah.
And do you understand when one of these is out of alignment?
Yeah.
That is a hard kind of spot to be. And so in his renovation of the heart, one of the questions he asks is, do you know what your soul craves?
Interesting.
And so then you go back to, okay, well, is my social life in alignment with God? Is my mind in alignment with God? Is my body in alignment with God? Is my heart in alignment with God? Back to heart posture. And so that's when I think, spiritual health, it's this alignment with God across all of these aspects.
Yeah. So as I listen to it, I think of the analogy of like with your physical health, one of the big measures is what's your resting heart rate. Mm-hmm. And I think you can think about your spiritual health. What's your resting heart posture? To your point, Cole, is it when you are at rest and in the silence, is your heart, is your spirit defaulting back to spirit, the fruits of the spirit or desires of the flesh? I think that's the way, like a barometer.
Or desires of the world.
Where does your brain, where does your brain go when you're in the quiet? Are you focused on God and what he wants? And are you calling attention to that? Or are you focused on social media and what the world's trying to draw your attention to? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of at that whole at rest.
And then how do you react when you're under stress or when you're faced with something tough? What comes out, the muscle memory that comes out is how much in check you are with the spirit.
So somewhere in all three of those descriptions, there's a really good definition.
There's something in there somewhere.
So rewind it.
And if you found it, listener, please put it in the comments.
Well, I know we're trying to somehow frame this and give a good definition of it, but I think when you back up, really spiritual health kind of embodies like us trying to be disciples of Jesus, us trying to become more like him.
Yeah.
I think Jesus is, and the life that he modeled that we see in scripture is like the picture or the epitome of like perfect spiritual health.
Absolutely.
And so that's what we're aiming for. So it's a lifetime of getting better and better. Kind of like a bodybuilder doesn't just go be like, I'm going to work on this for a year and get really fit and then I'm done. You know what I mean? Like it's a lifestyle.
Oh yeah, there's a reason we still work out every day or as much as we can. It's because you don't stay in shape by doing it one time.
And when you miss a week, it's painful to jump back into.
Yeah.
But I think what I like about that is you know where your weak spots are. Like you're able to like
you test it out.
See them, or you can test them, or you realize a muscle group is not where it should be after you're doing other workouts. And so how do you translate that into a spiritual area of our life? Like how do you know when certain parts are weaker? How do we identify those?
I think through the exact same way as training. One example I've had personally in life at the local church that all of us here attend, they have a recovery program called Regeneration that comes out of Watermark Church in the Dallas area. And really that program takes you through looking at where the hurt is in your life, where the sin is in your life, where it's taken root, what those patterns are. And so as you go through that and you learn to hand that over to God and make amends in your life with other people you've hurt and do all of that, what I've noticed is that makes me much more sensitive to when things are off. Like I'll start to notice, like for example, and when somebody says something that bothers me, before my reaction might be to run and hide, or maybe to get angry or to be resentful and be passive aggressive, whatever that reaction may be. Now I recognize that those are signs of spiritual unhealthiness. Those are kind of like, I think either before or after the list of the fruits of the Spirit, Paul gives a list of like the anti-fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
Yeah. And so
it's pretty awesome.
It's kind of like a check engine light almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you start to be like, you have that initial reaction, but then I'm getting to a point where it's like, I stop and say, okay, what's going on here? Why did what they just say bother me? You know, so it's kind of akin to what you were talking about, Billy, when you're exercising and you can tell where your weaknesses are, you start to get that same level of sensitivity as you're going throughout your day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how many people will do that throughout the day where you're like, ooh, that stung, or ooh, I reacted in a strange way to that. Do we take that time to reflect at the end of the day or in the moment and say, maybe you jot it down and you think about it later, but it reminds me of David asking, hey, God, know my anxious heart and search everything about me. This is a dangerous prayer to pray.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important one.
Yeah, for sure.
What if we give others permission to tell us?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's scarier.
Check your spiritual meter.
Yeah. You guys all have permission to speak it into my life, so
Likewise.
tell me when my spirit's not straight.
Brandon, you said something a minute ago that I feel like is important to discuss, which is you can not be an intentional disciple or pursuer of Christ or Christianity and still emanate the fruits of the Holy Spirit. You can still be a good person, right? But so I guess the question is why? Why care about spiritual health? If you can do it without this conscious pursuit of God and Jesus, why should the listener, even after you said that, not pause this episode and turn it off?
I think one important aspect to it is kind of jumping back to regeneration and that whole program.
Yeah.
That whole journey for me, although I took that first step to go through that program, and I made the effort in the sense of doing the daily curriculum, doing the daily work, putting in that daily effort, so much more of that transformation came about over time when I was completely unaware. In other words, as I turned control over to God and trusted him in what I was doing in that program, he changed me in ways that I was not even intending or thinking of or was even conscious about. And I mentioned that to say, there are good people. I've met, I lived in Japan for a long time. Most of those people weren't Christian. There were great people I met there.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've, as I've been blessed to get to know a lot of men one-on-one, everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And there may be some rare people out there who have powered through some really difficult stuff on their own. But so much of that is stuff that that's beyond us.
Yeah.
Healing ourselves or working our way past something. Like we need Jesus in our life because he's the only one that can truly heal that stuff. He's the only one who can change it. And so that's where I think spiritual health is important, not just being a nice person.
If I think about your question, Spencer, I don't know if this is going to sound harsh or not, but I think, yes, you can produce all of those, all the fruits of the Spirit. But I think it's just a flavor if you don't have God as a part of that.
Yeah.
It's not the fullest potential of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. It's a piece of it, yes, but it's not in the fullness that it has the capability to be when God is actually a part of it.
Yeah.
And so there's a missing element that you're going to hit a wall at some point.
Yeah, if I could add to it, drawing from the power of the Holy Spirit was the differentiator in my life.
Yeah.
There's a power there that is out of our control. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
And it put to work can do things far beyond anything we can do on our own. So that's
even in this renovation of the heart from Dallas Willard, he says, and he'll use spiritual growth instead of health, but he says the progression of spiritual growth starts from the bedrock of God's divine power.
Absolutely.
That has granted us everything pertaining to life and godliness. It starts with his power. Yes, we can try to willpower our way through some of that stuff, but at the same time, we only get so far.
Yeah.
You'll get worn out over time.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And I feel like what I hear you all say is there's also you can do those things, but you might do those if you're not pursuing God out of chance. If you're doing that, you're doing it for a purpose to glorify him. And I think that's some of the big why behind it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Why they're producing fruit. It's different when you've accepted Jesus and made space for him.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, all of it. I think, we talked about receiving God's love, and then what I think we've moved on to is we're talking about being transformed by God's love. And so through that, or the result of that, is the fruits that we've been talking about. And hopefully from that, we then extend God's love out to those around us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Jesus talks about God's kingdom is here, and what he was modeling, I think is exactly that. Like we accept that we're not enough on our own, that we need God in our life. We allow him, we make that room for him to come in, to change us, and then we live that out to the people around us.
I think this is a question we want to ask the listeners, but I kind of want to ask each of you. Where's your spiritual health at right now?
Depends on the day, honestly.
I couldn't agree. Yeah.
So where is it at today?
Are we doing like a scale of 1 to 10 type of thing, or?
However you want to do it.
Okay.
Maybe you should tell us where our scale is at.
Well,
That's right. No, you tell me.
You tell me.
speak.
I just finished leading a small group of 13-year-olds, and based on the thoughts that were going to my mind in reaction to some of their behaviors, right in this moment, I'm a 2. But this month, I feel like my spiritual health is probably like a 5.5, 6. And it's because of what this very thing that we've been talking about is, have I allowed my heart to be transformed? I'm convinced that I'm on the right path, but am I committed? And I think that heart is the difference of it. So like, I'd give myself like a 6 if I was given a 1 to 10 scale.
Okay.
I like how you differentiated the time frame.
Well,
Over a larger time frame, I'm much healthier than I was in the last 2 days.
oh,
Because there's,
100%.
I think that's one thing to point out. There's going to be bad moments.
Oh, yeah.
We're all going to have bad moments around other people where it's going to look bad. And this is something I struggle with a ton is whenever I make a mistake, my first immediate thought is, holy crap, how does this affect my witness?
Yeah.
And then I let that weigh on me for a long time, probably more than it should. And so I think part of that is give yourself some grace and also think about not just the day, but like, it's a journey. And there's going to be some times where you're headed up and you're going to hit a peak and then you're going to go back down and then you're going to hit a valley and then you're going to come back up. Like that's actually what growth looks like. Growth is not a linear trajectory.
Yeah. It's like the stock market.
It really just isn't.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be these ups and downs, peaks and valleys that you're going to go through. And so do you feel, you mentioned it, you feel like you're headed in that right direction,
I do.
which is.
Yeah, and I think that touches on something really important is, as you're growing in faith, as you're kind of paying attention to this more, is looking back and reflecting, recognizing how you have grown. Because even as Billy mentioned, there will be those peaks and valleys. Those valleys today, let's say you've been on this journey for 5 years, for example, those valleys today are probably not the same valleys as they were 5 years ago. Like if you look back, those valleys were probably much lower and maybe longer, wider valleys.
Yeah.
I think my valleys have gotten shallower, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't go as deep because of grace. I've learned to give myself grace and I've learned to give others grace around me. So on my trajectory, yes, there's highs and lows, but my lows don't go as low because of, I know that God's given me so much grace. So I'm giving, reciprocating that as much as I can anyways.
So on that, where would you put yourself?
I'd probably be similar to Spencer. I have my good days, the days that I'm, serving at church and going to men's Bible study, and that sort of thing. And that's when I've got my spiritual meter is high, and then I've got the lows. But over the stretch of the past year, it's way, like Cody was saying, it's a lot better than it was 5 years ago.
What's been different for you in the past?
You guys, the group of men around me, definitely.
I'm just feeling the word foundation as being the differentiator. Up until this point in my life, the last couple of years, my foundation depended completely and 100% on my 2 feet. Like it was me and only me. And if I failed, it was me. If I was great, it was me. Mm-hmm. But now I've got a lot of other things involved with my baseline that I can check in with. And so if I had 2 horrible days, I don't have to have the rest of time be horrible, or even
doesn't have to drag
2 more days, or even, just bouncing back out of it and back into.
Yeah, I think it touches on, again, going back to God, who he is, love, that he's a communal being and that he created us in his image to be that same way. And so the importance of being in community with others. If you're married, your spouse is part of that, but then having the other, for us here as men, having other men around us that either call us out when we're doing something stupid, or when we're off, when we're maybe in a little bit longer stretch of that spiritual funk, having someone just reach out and being like, hey, you doing okay over there?
Yeah.
And there's something about that just completely lifts you up. Like that feeling of like being alone and isolated, you're like, okay, I'm not going through this by myself. That can just completely transform it. So I think that role of community is huge, like you were talking about. And not to evade the question from you, Billy, myself. I definitely feel like I'm growing. One thing that has been huge for me is I still will have things that come up. Like I mentioned, I'll notice that check engine light now. And there's even some things that I know that are there in the background that I'm like, yeah, God, you're going to make me deal with this one of these days. And
But I'm going to put it off for another
as long as I
5,000 miles.
yes. But even when those things come up and I can't avoid them anymore, my perspective is different. It's going to be rough. It might be painful, but I know I've got a group of people to go through it with, and I know that God is going to help me through to the other side. So it helps give me that strength to be able to just put my head down and keep walking forward through it.
Well, and sometimes it's good not to knee-jerk react to something too.
Mhm.
You also should take some time and make sure you have the right heart posture
Yeah,
to approach
absolutely.
that situation.
No, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. So going back to the question that Billy kept on asking, so what is spiritual health? Do we want to, as we get close to the end of this episode, anyone want to try to actually define it?
I'm not a word master, so the best I could do was using Dallas Willard's definition.
Was it those 3 points you brought up?
Yeah, so like, I guess if I had to pick one way to define it, so okay, fine, maybe I guess I will define it.
Yes, good job.
Billy.
You got it.
Is my whole life in alignment with God's will?
To keep it simple.
Alignment with God's will is
Yeah.
kind of how I would put it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, there's all kinds of different facets that are a part of that, but when those get out of whack, that's when I think the spiritual health starts to break down. Whether it's maybe I, doubt some of the things that God has said about me. Maybe it's I doubt the plans that God has for me. Maybe it's whatever the doubts that come that way. When those get out of alignment, is whenever sin starts to creep in, as it says in Genesis. It's crouching at your door. I think those are the things that it's waiting there. And so whenever something gets out of alignment, it's really easy to let that slip in.
I've got just a couple thoughts going through my head to add to your definition.
Go for it.
One would be just loving God and loving people. Like, am I doing those two things well? And another thing is like, do I trust God and do I believe in his abundance that he's already provided me with what I need and that he's going to take care of me? Because when I don't, that's when it tends to spiral towards me trying to grab control and take care of things. And that's when I get off track and I walk away from him and I'm not as connected. And without God, that spiritual health meter goes down real quick.
Mm-hmm. How do you continue on the upward trajectory of making your spiritual life healthier? What does that look like for you?
For me right now, it's just staying in the Bible, because that's where I would lack in my spiritual health, is just reading the Word daily. So we're doing the Sermon on the Mount thing together with Bible Project.
Yeah.
I've also just picked up my own devotional without someone asking, because I feel like I would just want to do something on my own for myself.
Awesome.
So I'm a couple days into that, and then I just picked up that book. What was it called?
Wild at Heart.
Wild at
That's a
Heart.
good one.
So, and not picked up the book. I'm listening to it. So if you're listening right now and you don't like to read, you can listen. Billy's mentioned that before. Audiobooks are great. The Bible app in your phone can talk to you when you're driving to work. So yeah, there are no excuses. So removing the excuses out of my life is really helping me.
Yeah. I think if we jump back to a series or two ago, we talked about how to get started.
Mhm.
Reading your Bible,
Mhm.
attending church, prayer, worship, trying to find community, which each one of those, it's easy to throw those out. It's maybe not as easy to like just pick up and start doing all those things. So maybe go back and review some of those episodes, re-listen to it, hear some of the stuff that we talked about. But all of those definitely tie back into this idea of getting healthy spiritually.
And if there's people out there that are listening, and you're like, yeah, I do read my Bible. Yes, I am serving at church. The practices that we talked about, maybe I'll push you a little farther. And, have you thought about practicing a Sabbath? Have you thought about a regular practice of fasting? Do you have just some silence and solitude time? That has been a big one personally for me of helping me back to how do I know when my soul is out of alignment? It's that when I don't get that, my body just feels different. It's really kind of interesting.
It's very similar to me when I don't get a workout.
Mm-hmm.
I'm out of whack.
Yeah. Like
So
I can almost,
that makes
I have this
sense.
hurried feeling when I don't get it. And so there's all these different practices, start to think about some of those. Like there's so many, there's all kinds of them, but like maybe start to get outside your comfort zone a little bit, experiment with it, try it, take a step and do it. That's why they're called spiritual practices or disciplines. I think these are things that help you.
I feel like Billy's teeing up a new series for himself.
Right? I think that it kind of all ties back to where we started, which was really going back to the model of Jesus gave us.
Mhm.
So there's just so many of them. Like if we think about all the examples he gave us, how he believed in himself, because we talked about how we talk to ourselves, who he believed himself to be, how he related to God, how he related to others, how he loved God and how he loved others. Like there's so many examples in the Gospels. Just look at Luke's chapters 5 through 7. So many great examples.
Jam-packed back to back there.
Yeah. But I think I go back to what Cody just said about that word foundation. If you look at what we've kind of talked about in this series of physical and mental, you could almost say that your spiritual health is the foundation or the root that can drive those other two.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It would seem. And so, listeners, as we start to wrap this up and think about where do we go from here? What do we do? We always use this phrase, just start where you're at, figure out where you're at. We talked a little bit about figuring out your spiritual health requires a level of attentiveness. It requires you to stop and actually pay attention. So if you've never done that before, when you hit end on this episode, maybe stop, pause, and pray, and just ask God to show you what that next step is that you can take to grow in your spiritual health. Give yourself time to create space to maybe hear what he's got for you. And maybe you already know. Maybe it's kind of what Brandon said. He's been whispering and you got to deal with it. But write that down. Share it with someone if you can. Email it to us. Leave it in the comments if you know. We'll be praying for you. We can hold you accountable virtually.
And if you don't, like if you're thinking like I don't even know like what I would even ask, maybe I'll throw in just a practical question to ask, which is how well do I love other people? Because if I go back to John, I think it's John 13:35, it says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Like that's the scale.
Yeah.
Of do you follow Jesus? Is my spiritual health in alignment? How well do you love other people?
So what's that one small step that's going to help you love those around you better? Ponder on that. Think about it. Find ways you can put it into place. And while you're doing that, we'll be praying for you and we'll be thinking about you, and we'll see you.
Bye, friends.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.